My daughter-in-law pressed me against the cold stone wall outside the courthouse and screamed that I was nothing but a worthless old woman, a stain on the family name. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Attorneys in tailored suits paused mid-conversation. Court clerks carrying stacks of files stopped walking. Security guards turned their heads. The echo of high heels on marble floors went silent as strangers gathered to witness my humiliation. Miranda Hayes, my son's wife, stood before me with fire in her eyes. She raised her voice as though she were in her own living room, as though I were merely furniture blocking her path. She pointed at me with a perfectly manicured finger, her nails painted deep crimson, and repeated every cruel word she had whispered to me in private over the years. But this time, she wanted witnesses. This time, she wanted to break me where it would hurt the most. My son David stood just a few feet away. His hands were buried in the pockets of his designer suit. His eyes were fixed on the ground. He didn't look up when she shoved me. He didn't say a single word to stop her. I stayed silent.
I didn't shout back.
I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I only felt the chill of the wall pressing into my spine, the weight of curious stares from strangers, and the suffocating silence that filled the air after Miranda finished her tirade. I inhaled slowly and lowered my head. I let them think whatever they wanted. I let them see me as a fragile, voiceless old woman, a mother with nowhere left to turn. But inside me, something shifted. Something snapped. And it wasn't my heart. It was the final thread of hope I had been clinging to, the hope that this family still needed me, that I still mattered, that staying quiet was still worth it. Miranda knew nothing about me.
Neither did David.
Neither of them had any idea who I truly was. And as she continued speaking with contempt, as people slowly resumed walking and pretended they hadn't witnessed anything, only one thought echoed in my mind. Just one. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, they would know everything. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I am 71 years old. And for 30 years, I served as a judge in this very courthouse. But they never knew. I never told them. I chose to simply be Mom. Just Grandma. Just the woman who made Sunday dinners and slipped David money when he was struggling. The invisible woman who didn't deserve a seat at the table when important guests arrived. I hid my career like it was something shameful. I buried my accomplishments, my degrees, my hundreds of cases, everything. Because I believed that if I made myself smaller, quieter, less intimidating, they would love me more. They would include me more. They would need me more. How terribly wrong I was. Miranda finished her outburst and turned on her heel. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the marble as she strode toward the courthouse entrance. Her leather briefcase swung from her shoulder with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. David followed her without a glance in my direction.
No apology. No acknowledgement.
Nothing. I stood there for a few more seconds, steadying my breath. I adjusted my beige cardigan, the one Miranda always said made me look ancient. I smoothed down my silver hair, the hair she suggested I dye because it gave the wrong impression. Then I walked toward the courthouse. But I didn't enter through the main doors. I didn't trail behind them like a shadow. I didn't hide in a corner the way they expected. Instead, I took the side corridor, the one reserved for those of us who work here. The one that leads directly to the private offices, the deliberation chambers, and the changing rooms where we keep our robes. I walked that hallway in silence. I nodded at Dorothy, the clerk who had worked beside me for over 2 decades. She smiled warmly and asked if I was ready for today's case. I told her yes. More than ready. I stepped into the changing room and removed the beige cardigan. I slipped off the plain shoes Miranda once mocked as something a charity case would wear. Then I reached into the closet and pulled out the black robe, the one hanging there with my name embroidered inside the collar. Eleanor Mitchell.
Judge.
Courtroom 3. I studied my reflection in the mirror. 71 years old. Silver hair. Lines around my eyes that told stories of decades lived fully. Hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. I put on my reading glasses. I adjusted the robe until it fell just right. Then I walked out. I moved down the long corridor leading to courtroom 3, the one lined with portraits of every judge who had served here since 1952. My portrait hung there, third from the left. But they had never seen it. They had never asked. They had never cared. I reached the courtroom doors and pushed them open slowly. The security guard held the door and greeted me with a respectful nod. Inside, the room was already filling. Attorneys shuffled papers. Witnesses whispered nervously. Family members sat in wooden pews, waiting. And in the front row on the right side, there she was, Miranda Hayes. She sat with perfect posture, reviewing documents, murmuring to her assistant with that confident smirk I knew so well. David sat 2 rows behind her, watching, waiting, completely unaware of what was about to happen. I entered through the side door that leads directly to the bench. I climbed the 3 wooden steps. I settled into the high-backed chair, the one with my name engraved on a small brass plate. I placed my hands on the desk. I took one final breath. And I waited. The murmur of voices continued for a few more seconds, until someone glanced up. Until someone noticed. Until the silence spread across the room like a wave. Miranda still hadn't seen me. She was still absorbed in her papers, still laughing softly with her assistant, still convinced the world revolved around her. Then the court clerk rose to his feet. He cleared his throat. All rise. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Mitchell will preside over this hearing. Miranda's head lifted slowly. Her eyes swept across the room, confused, searching, until they found me. She saw me sitting there in my robe, glasses in hand, wearing the same face she had insulted just 10 minutes earlier. Her expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, then raw, unfiltered panic. Her mouth fell open. The paper slipped from her fingers and scattered across the floor. For the first time in all the years I had known her, Miranda Hayes was completely speechless. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at her with the same calm I had maintained outside, when she shoved me, when she screamed at me, when she treated me like garbage. David shot to his feet. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with something I had never seen before.
Fear. Shame.
Total disorientation. But I gave them no time to recover. I picked up the wooden gavel at my right hand. I raised it high, and I brought it down with a sharp crack that echoed through the entire room. This court is now in session. The room rose as one. Everyone stood, except Miranda. She remained frozen in her seat, eyes locked on me as though I were an apparition. I kept my gaze steady, my voice unwavering. This is case number 2025-20417. Granite Peak Holdings versus Crestview Development Partners. Contractual dispute. Amount in question, $500,000. I paused, letting my words settle. Attorney Miranda Hayes represents the plaintiff. Attorney Thomas Rivera represents the defendant. Are both parties present and prepared to proceed? The defense attorney answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Silence from Miranda. Her assistant nudged her arm. She blinked, swallowed. Her voice came out fractured, barely a whisper. Yes. Counselor Hayes, I didn't hear you clearly. Are you prepared to proceed? She straightened slightly, color draining from her face. Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor. The same woman who had called me worthless 10 minutes ago was now addressing me with respect. The same woman who shoved me against a wall was now trembling before my bench. And I, Eleanor Mitchell, 71 years old, mother to a son who had forgotten me, grandmother to 2 girls who barely knew my name, thought only one thing as I watched her crumble. This is just the beginning. There was a time when I believed being a mother was enough. I thought being a grandmother was a gift. I assumed my place in this family was secured simply by existing, by giving life, by showing up every time they needed me. But life doesn't work that way. Not when your children grow distant and forget where they came from. Not when they marry people who transform them into strangers. David was born when I was 26. His father, Robert, was a good man, honest, hardworking, devoted. He died of a sudden heart attack when David was only 15. I was left alone. A widow with a teenage son, a mortgage we were still paying, and bills that never stopped arriving. But I refused to surrender. I worked double shifts for years. I completed my law degree while David slept. I studied at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning, surrounded by textbooks and cold coffee. I graduated with honors. I secured a position at the district attorney's office. I climbed the ranks. I became a judge at 42. Everything I did was for him, to give him opportunities one never had, to make sure he never wanted for anything. And David succeeded. He graduated from law school. He opened his own firm. He started making serious money. I was proud of him. So proud it physically ached. I watched my son wearing expensive suits, driving luxury cars, dining at restaurants I couldn't afford. And I told myself it had all been worth it. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of struggle, it had finally paid off. Then he met Miranda. The first time I saw her was at a holiday dinner. David brought her without warning. She arrived in a fitted black dress, towering heels, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She sat at my table and surveyed my home with an expression she couldn't fully conceal, as though she were cataloging every worn piece of furniture, every faded curtain, every imperfect detail. I served the meal I had prepared. Roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Nothing elaborate, just honest food made with love. Miranda took 2 bites and set down her fork. "It's lovely," she said, "but I'm watching my figure." David said nothing. He just ate in silence while she dominated the conversation, her important clients, her impressive cases, her bright future. That night, as they were leaving, I overheard Miranda speaking to David at the front door. Her voice was low but clear. "Your mother lives in this cramped little place?
Can't you do something about that?
It reflects poorly on you, David. People will think you don't care." David mumbled something I couldn't make out. But he didn't defend me. And I stood on the other side of that door, my hands still damp from washing dishes, feeling something fracture inside my chest. I told myself it was just nerves. First impressions are always awkward. Things would improve with time. She just needed to get to know me. How naive I was. They married 6 months later. It was an extravagant ceremony in a grand ballroom that cost more than I earned in 2 years. No one asked for my opinion on anything. They simply informed me of the date and location. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, behind Miranda's influential friends, behind David's business partners, like a distant acquaintance who barely mattered. After the wedding, everything changed. David's visits grew rare. Phone calls became shorter. The Sunday lunches we used to share quietly disappeared. There was always an excuse. Work deadlines, travel commitments, social obligations. And when he did visit, Miranda came with him. Always critical. Always pointing out flaws. The walls needed repainting. The furniture was outdated. The garden was overgrown. I should hire help. I should move somewhere smaller. I should. She never asked how I was feeling. She never asked if I needed anything. She only cataloged my failures as though they were obvious to everyone. David never intervened. He sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, nodding absently while she spoke. And I smiled through it all. I thanked her for her advice, even when it stung, because I believed that if I stayed agreeable, if I made myself small, if I caused no trouble, they would keep coming back. But each visit grew colder. Each comment cut deeper. Each silence from David weighed heavier. Then the girls were born. Sophie first. 2 years later, Emma. My granddaughters. 2 beautiful children with David's eyes and Robert's gentle smile. I thought everything would finally change. I imagined that becoming a grandmother would restore my place in the family, give me purpose, give me connection, give me a reason to matter again. But Miranda wouldn't allow it. There was always a reason I couldn't see them. The girls were unwell. They had activities. They were exhausted. Miranda preferred them to spend time with her mother, who lived in a sprawling house with. I sent birthday gifts every year. Dolls, picture books, carefully chosen outfits. I never received a thank you call. I never saw photos of them wearing what I had sent. Just silence. One day, I gathered my courage and asked David if I could take the girls to the park. Just a few hours. Just enough time for them to know who their grandmother was. David went quiet for a long moment. Then he said he would discuss it with Miranda. That conversation never happened. Or if it did, the answer was no, because he never mentioned it again. And I didn't push. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I didn't want to cause problems. The years slipped by. I retired from the courthouse at 68 after 30 years of service. Hundreds of cases. Thousands of decisions that shaped lives. On the day of my retirement ceremony, David didn't attend. He claimed he had an important hearing. Miranda didn't even acknowledge my message. I went home alone that afternoon. A commemorative plaque tucked under my arm. A bouquet of flowers from colleagues who remembered me. A heart so heavy I could barely stand. Sitting in my quiet living room that evening, staring at the walls Miranda said needed repainting, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them about my career. I wouldn't share my accomplishments. I wouldn't reveal who I had been. Because if 30 years of dedication hadn't been enough to bring David to my retirement ceremony, nothing ever would be. I would just be mom. Just grandma. Just the simple old woman who lived alone and didn't cause any trouble. But that decision came with a cost. The more invisible I made myself, the more they treated me as though I didn't exist. Family gatherings at David's house became frequent. Elegant dinner parties. Birthday celebrations for the girls. Receptions with influential guests. I was never invited. I discovered these events by accident. A photo on social media, a passing comment David let slip W. Once, I showed up unannounced at Sophie's 8th birthday party. I rang the doorbell with a gift in my hands, a leather-bound storybook I had searched weeks to find. Miranda answered. She looked me over with cold eyes. Eleanor, I wasn't expecting you. It's Sophie's birthday, I said. I wanted to see her. Miranda's lips curled into something resembling a smile. This is really just for close family and Sophie's friends. We don't have room at the table. And honestly, the child barely knows you. We wouldn't want her feeling uncomfortable at her own party. She closed the door in my face. I stood on that doorstep for a long time. I could hear laughter inside. Children's voices. Music. Celebration. Everything happening on the other side of a door that would never open for me. I walked home alone. 15 blocks through the city. The storybook still tucked under my arm. Tears streaming down my face. That night, lying awake in the darkness, I asked myself what I had done wrong. Where had I lost my son? When had I stopped mattering? I found no answers. Only an emptiness that grew larger with each passing day.
2 more years crawled by.
David stopped visiting entirely. Phone calls dwindled to once every few months, brief, hollow conversations where he asked if I was doing okay and I said yes, even when it wasn't true. Then 6 months ago, something happened that changed everything. Something that woke me from the silent nightmare I had been living. It began by accident. David came to my house because he needed old documents I had been storing. His father's life insurance papers. He arrived in a rush. He set his phone on the kitchen table while he searched through boxes in the study. The phone buzzed. The screen lit up. And I saw the message. It was from Miranda. Asterisk spoke with the lawyer today. We can have her declared mentally incompetent within 6 months. The house is worth at least $200,000. We sell it fast, split the money, and put her in a facility. She won't even understand what's happening. Asterisk. I read that message 3 times. 4 times.
5.
The words burned into my eyes like acid. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only stand there, staring at that glowing screen, watching those cold, calculated sentences destroy what little remained of my world. Declared incompetent. As if I were an object. As if at 71 years old, I had no mind of my own. No right to make my own decisions. No voice that mattered. They wanted to take my house, the home where I raised David, where I mourned Robert, where I spent countless nights studying to become who I was. They wanted to sell it, pocket the money, and discard me in some facility like I was nothing. I heard David's footsteps returning. I set the phone exactly where it had been. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I took a breath. And when he walked into the kitchen holding the documents, I was pouring coffee as though nothing had happened. Thanks, Mom. I need to run. Meeting in 30 minutes. Of course, sweetheart. Drive safely. He kissed my forehead quickly, an automatic gesture, empty of meaning, grabbed his phone, and left. I stood alone in my kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the darkened living room for hours, replaying what I had read, trying to comprehend how my own son could plot against me so casually, so coldly, without ever looking me in the eye. But I already knew the answer. David wasn't the son I had raised. He wasn't the boy who cried in my arms after nightmares. He wasn't the teenager who held me when he missed his father. That David had vanished years ago, replaced by a man who only looked forward, chasing money, chasing status, chasing whatever Miranda pointed him toward. And Miranda herself? She was the architect of my destruction. The one who had whispered poison into my son's ear for years. The one who had slowly, systematically, erased me from their lives. But there was something neither of them understood. I was not a helpless old woman waiting to be discarded. I was not someone without resources, without intelligence, without power. For 30 years, I had been a judge. I had presided over cases of inheritance fraud, family manipulation, elder exploitation. I had seen children betray parents, spouses steal from each other, families tear themselves apart over money. And I had learned one fundamental truth. The law does not forgive those who act with malice. And justice, when applied correctly, can change everything. The next morning, I called my attorney. His name was Marcus Webb. I had met him 2 decades earlier when I presided over his case. He had been wrongly accused of financial fraud. The evidence was flimsy. The prosecution was rushing to judgment. But I took the time to examine every document, every testimony, and I discovered he was innocent. I acquitted him. I gave him the second chance. He never forgot. Every year on the anniversary of that verdict, he sent me a handwritten card. Every holiday, a basket of fruit arrived with a personal note. And when I retired, he was one of the few who attended the ceremony. Marcus answered my call on the second ring. Mrs. Mitchell. What a pleasant surprise. How are you? I need your help, Marcus. It's urgent. We met at his office that same afternoon. I told him everything. The message I had seen, the years of mistreatment, Miranda's scheme to have me declared incompetent. Marcus listened in silence, taking careful notes, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. When I finished, he set down his. Mrs. Mitchell, this is serious. But we have options and we have time. If they attempt to declare you incompetent, they'll need medical evidence, psychological evaluations, and testimony. They can't accomplish that quickly. I don't want to wait for them to try, I said. I want to protect myself now. I want to ensure that when the moment comes, they have no chance of succeeding. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we'll build an impenetrable legal fortress. Medical evaluations confirming your cognitive health. Psychological assessments documenting your sound judgment. We'll revise your will, establish protections, and ensure no one, absolutely no one, can make decisions about your life without your explicit consent. That's exactly what we did. Over the following weeks, I underwent comprehensive neurological and psychological evaluations. The results were flawless. My cognitive function was intact. My decision-making capacity was unimpaired. Any judge who reviewed those documents would reach the same conclusion. There was absolutely no basis to declare me incompetent. Marcus also restructured my entire estate. David remained in my will, but with strict conditions. He could not sell my house without my written authorization. He could not make medical decisions on my behalf without my consent. He would not receive a single dollar until after my death. And if he attempted to manipulate my estate while I was alive, he would forfeit everything. I signed every document with a steady hand.
No hesitation. No tears.
Because this wasn't about pain anymore. This was about survival. But I didn't stop there. Marcus hired a private investigator, a discreet professional experienced in cases like mine. We asked him to examine Miranda's finances, her legal practice, her movements. What we discovered was far worse than I had imagined. Miranda had been embezzling from the law firm she shared with David. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, but the sums had grown exponentially over time. 10,000, 20,000, $50,000 vanishing into phantom accounts. David appeared oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't want to know. But the evidence was undeniable. Falsified transfers, fabricated receipts, emails between Miranda and her accountant discussing how to disguise the theft as operating expenses. And there was more. Miranda had accumulated massive personal debts, credit cards maxed out, personal loans in default. Worst of all, she had secretly mortgaged the house where she lived with David, without his knowledge. She had forged his signature on the documents. She had used the firm's letterhead to make it appear legitimate. Miranda was desperate. And my house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. That's why she wanted me declared incompetent. That's why she needed to sell quickly. Because she needed the money before her entire world collapsed. Marcus organized everything into a comprehensive file. Evidence of fraud. Evidence of forgery. Evidence of embezzlement. Enough to destroy Miranda's career. Enough to send her to prison. But I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. Because there was something I wanted more than legal victory. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to understand who I truly was. Not the burden they thought I was. Not the confused old woman blocking their path. But the professional I had always been. The judge who had earned her position through decades of dedication. Marcus looked at me with raised eyebrows when I explained my plan. Are you certain about this, Mrs. Mitchell? It carries risks. If they suspect anything beforehand, they could alter their approach. I'm certain, Marcus. Trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing.
And I did.
I had spent 30 years doing precisely this, analyzing situations, developing strategies, waiting for the perfect moment to act. He contacted colleagues at the courthouse to learn about upcoming cases involving Miranda. And he found one. A major case. A commercial dispute between two construction companies. The amount at stake, $500,000. Miranda represented the plaintiff, and she desperately needed to win. If she lost, her reputation would suffer. Clients would begin to question her competence. And with her mounting debts, she couldn't afford that risk. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. Tuesday morning. Courtroom 3. Marcus smiled when he delivered the news. Guess who's been assigned as the presiding judge? For the first time in months, I felt something stir inside me. Something that had been dormant for far too long. Tell me. Dorothy, your former clerk. She handles case assignments now. When she saw this one, she thought you might be interested in returning for a single session. A visiting judge. A special arrangement. Dorothy arranged that? She always held you in the highest regard, Mrs. Mitchell. When I explained the situation, without revealing details, she understood immediately. She said it would be an honor to have you back, even if only for one day. I accepted without hesitation, because this wasn't merely a legal proceeding. This was the moment everything would change. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing meticulously. I reviewed every document related to the case. Every argument, every legal precedent. I ensured I understood the details more thoroughly than either attorney. I also prepared myself emotionally. I knew that when Miranda saw me presiding over her case, when David finally understood who his mother truly was, everything would explode. I needed to be ready. I needed to remain composed. I needed to stay calm even if I was trembling inside. The night before the hearing, sleep eluded me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, rehearsing every word I would speak, every gesture I would make. I thought of Robert, how proud he would have been, how he would have embraced me and told me I was doing the right thing. I thought of David, the child he had been, the stranger he had become. And I wondered if any trace of the son I loved still existed within the man who had plotted to discard me. At 6 in the morning, I rose. I showered and dressed in simple clothes, the beige cardigan, the plain shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they expected. Fragile, insignificant, invisible. I took a taxi to the courthouse. I arrived early. I stood outside, looking up at the building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had made decisions that altered the course of countless lives, where I had been someone who mattered. And then I saw them arrive. David appeared first, wearing a tailored gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase, his expression serious and focused. Behind him came Miranda, black dress, designer heels, that arrogant smile I recognized so well. They didn't notice me at first. They were deep in conversation. Miranda was discussing strategy, how she planned to demolish the opposition, how this victory would open important doors. Then they spotted me standing near the entrance. Miranda stopped abruptly. Her eyes swept over me with familiar contempt. David looked away, uncomfortable, as he always did when he sensed conflict, but lacked the courage to address it. Eleanor,
What are you doing here?
it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. As though my presence in a public building were an offense. Good morning, Miranda. Good morning, David. My voice emerged calm, measured, exactly as I had practiced. David mumbled something inaudible. Miranda didn't bother responding. She simply examined me with those cold, calculating eyes. Do you have some kind of appointment here? Because if you need legal help, you should go elsewhere. We have an important hearing. I smiled slightly. I know. Good luck with your case. Miranda frowned, confused, probably wondering how I knew about her hearing. But I didn't give her time to question me further. I turned and walked toward the entrance. That's when it happened. Miranda caught up to me in 3 quick strides. She seized my arm, her fingers digging into my skin like talons. Wait, why are you really here? Did you come to embarrass us? To humiliate us in front of important people? Her voice escalated. People began turning to watch. Attorneys,
Clerks.
security personnel, all of them witnesses to what was unfolding. Miranda, please release my arm.
No.
I want answers. You always appear where you're not wanted. Always in the way. Always complicating everything. She shoved me. Not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to send me stumbling backward into the wall. My spine struck the cold stone. Pain radiated through my aging bones. David stood frozen 10 feet away. Watching. Doing nothing. You're an embarrassment, Eleanor. A pathetic old woman who refuses to accept when she's no longer relevant. Look at yourself, those shabby clothes, that unkempt hair. You're an embarrassment to your own son. That's why we exclude you from everything. Because you humiliate us. Every word pierced me like a blade. But I didn't react. I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I simply observed her, memorizing every detail of her face, every cruel expression, knowing that in mere minutes, everything would transform. Miranda released me with a final contemptuous gesture. She brushed her hands together as though she had touched something repulsive. David finally approached, but not to comfort me.
To her.
He placed his hand on her shoulder. A gesture of solidarity. Of complicity. Let's go, Miranda. We'll be late. She nodded. She cast one final dismissive glance at me, and they both walked toward the courthouse without looking back. I remained there for several more seconds, breathing, feeling the sting feeling the ache in my back where I had struck the wall, feeling every fiber of my being crying out for justice. Then I moved. Not through the main entrance, not trailing behind them. I took the side corridor, the one reserved for judges. Dorothy was waiting for me. She embraced me the moment she saw me. Mrs. Mitchell, you're shaking. Are you all right?
I'm perfectly fine, Dorothy.
Thank you for everything. She guided me to the changing room. She helped me remove the beige cardigan. She reached into the closet and retrieved the black robe hanging there, the one with my name embroidered inside. Eleanor Mitchell.
Judge.
I put it on slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric settle on my shoulders, feeling something within me reawaken after years of dormancy. It wasn't vengeance I felt. It was dignity. It was a restoration of who I had always been, who I still was, despite everything they had tried to strip away. Dorothy's eyes glistened with tears. "We've missed you here, Mrs. Mitchell. This place hasn't been the same without you." "I've missed it too." I adjusted the robe. I put on my glasses. I studied my reflection one final time. 71 years old. Silver hair. Lines etched by decades of living fully. But also strength. Also wisdom. Also power. "I'm ready." Dorothy walked me to the entrance of courtroom 3. Before I entered, she squeezed my hand. "Show them who you are, Mrs. Mitchell. Make them truly see." "I will." I pushed the doors open. The security guard greeted me with deference. I entered the courtroom I knew as intimately as my own home, where I had spent countless hours, where I had rendered decisions that changed lives. The room was packed. Miranda sat in the front row, shuffling papers, whispering to her assistant, radiating that smug confidence I had witnessed for years. David sat several rows behind her, alone, unsuspecting. I walked through the side entrance, leading directly to the B. I placed my hands on the polished desk. I took one final breath, and I waited. The murmuring gradually subsided as awareness rippled through the room. One person looked up, then another. Then the silence spread like a wave. Miranda remained absorbed in her documents, oblivious, still inhabiting her small, arrogant world. The court clerk rose to his feet. He cleared his throat. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Mitchell will preside over this hearing." Miranda's head lifted slowly. Her eyes scanned the room, searching, confused, until they found me. She saw me seated at the bench, in my robe, glasses in hand, the same face she had assaulted just minutes earlier. Miranda's expression cycled through a spectrum of emotions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The papers slipped from her grasp and scattered across the floor. David leaped to his feet, so abruptly his chair toppled backward with a crash. His face had drained of all color. He stared at me as though witnessing something impossible, as though reality itself had fractured. I remained utterly still. I observed them with the same serenity I had cultivated over 30 years. The clerk spoke again. "All rise for the Honorable Judge." The entire room stood. Everyone, except Miranda. She remained seated, frozen, her eyes locked on me as though I were a specter from a nightmare. Her assistant had to physically touch her shoulder twice before she finally rose on unsteady legs. "Good morning. Please be seated." My voice was firm, clear, commanding. The room obeyed. Bodies settled into chairs. I opened the case file before me. Case number 2025-20417. Granite Peak Holdings vs. Crestview Development Partners. Contractual dispute regarding alleged breach of agreement. Amount in dispute, $500,000. I looked up. Attorney Miranda Hayes represents the plaintiff. Attorney Thomas Rivera represents the defendant. Are both parties present and prepared to proceed? The defense attorney responded instantly. "Yes, Your Honor." Silence from Miranda. Her assistant nudged her discreetly. She blinked, swallowed. When she finally spoke, her voice was fractured. Yes. Counselor Hayes, I did not hear you clearly. Are you prepared to proceed?" She forced herself upright. "Yes, Your Honor." Your Honor. The same woman who had called me worthless less than an hour ago. The same woman who had shoved me against a wall. Now trembling before my bench. And I, Eleanor Mitchell, 71 years old, mother of a son who had betrayed me, grandmother to children who barely knew my name, thought only one thing. This is merely the beginning. The hearing proceeded. Miranda, attempted to present her opening arguments, but her composure had shattered completely. She confused dates. She cited incorrect clauses. She forgot fundamental details that any competent attorney should know instinctively about a case she had spent months preparing. I corrected her each time, patiently, professionally, but firmly. exactly as I would with any attorney who appeared before me unprepared. Counselor Hayes, according to the documents in my possession, the contract value was $1.5 million, not the $1.2 million you stated. Please verify your information before continuing. Miranda's hands shook as she rifled through her papers. You are correct, Your Honor. I misspoke. Continue. But she couldn't regain her footing. Every argument emerged muddled. Every assertion lacked supporting evidence. Every moment exposed her professional inadequacy before a room full of observers. David sat in the back row, his head buried in his hands. After 2 grueling hours, I had gathered sufficient information. We will take a 1-hour recess. When court reconvenes, I will deliver my ruling. Court is recessed. I struck the gavel. The room began emptying. Miranda remained motionless in her seat. Her assistant attempted conversation, but she appeared not to hear. David approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up and whispered something. I saw David shake his head. I saw him withdraw his hand. I saw him, for the first time in years, refuse to stand beside her. I returned to my temporary office. Dorothy brought me tea. Through the window, I observed David pacing beside his car in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing frantically. Part of me yearned to go to him, to embrace him, to tell him everything would somehow be all right. But another part, the part that had awakened the moment I read that message, understood this was necessary. I could no longer diminish myself so they could feel powerful. The clock marked the hour. Time to return. I entered the courtroom and took my place at the bench. Everyone was seated. Miranda had managed to compose herself slightly. She had reapplied her makeup, straightened her posture, but her eyes still betrayed that barely contained terror. David had returned. He occupied the same seat as before, but now he looked at me differently. Not with indifference. With something I couldn't entirely interpret. Bewilderment.
Shame.
Perhaps even the faint stirring of respect. I struck the gavel. Court is reconvened. I have reviewed all submitted documents, heard testimony from both parties, and am prepared to render my decision. The room fell absolutely silent. In the matter of Granite Peak Holdings versus Crestview Development Partners, I find in favor of the defendant. A gasp rippled through the plaintiff's side. Miranda's face drained of color. The plaintiff has failed to provide adequate documentation supporting their claims. The contract in question contains ambiguities that the plaintiff's counsel did not adequately address. Moreover, the evidence presented by the defense demonstrates that the alleged breach was the result of circumstances beyond the defendant's control, specifically, delays caused by the plaintiff's own failure to deliver materials on schedule. I paused, letting my words settle. Counselor Hayes, I must also note that your preparation for this case fell significantly below the professional standards expected in this court. Basic factual errors, missing documentation, and contradictory arguments suggest either negligence or inadequate attention to your client's interests. I strongly recommend you review your professional practices before appearing in this court again. Miranda stood motionless. The color that had returned to her face drained away once more. Her assistant stared at the floor. The courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Case dismissed. Court is adjourned. I struck the gavel one final time. I stepped down from the bench. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as people began filing out. Miranda remained rooted in place. Her assistant was speaking to her urgently, but she appeared to hear nothing. David rose slowly from his seat. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he began walking toward the side exit, toward where I would emerge. I removed my robe in the changing room. I folded it carefully and returned it to its place in the closet. I put on my cardigan. I stepped into the corridor. David was waiting. Mom. His voice was barely a whisper. David.
I didn't know.
I never knew you were that you had been. A judge?
No.
You never asked. You were never curious about what I did with my life when I wasn't being your mother. He flinched as though I had struck him. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you simply sorry that you were caught? He couldn't meet my eyes. I saw the message, David. 6 months ago. I saw what Miranda wrote about having me declared incompetent, about selling my house, about disposing of me in a facility. His face crumpled. Mom, I never would have let that happen. I swear. But you were considering it. You were discussing it. You were entertaining the possibility while I sat alone in my house, wondering why my own son had abandoned me. Tears rolled down his cheeks. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know how I became this person. Miranda was so persuasive, and I was so busy, and I stopped thinking about what really mattered. I studied my son, this stranger who wore my child's face. I spent 30 years on that bench, David. I saw families destroy themselves over money. I saw children betray parents. I saw love turn to poison. And I always wondered how it happened, how people who once cared for each other could become such enemies. I stepped closer to him. Now I understand. It happened slowly, one small betrayal at a time. One silence when you should have spoken. One closed door when you should have welcomed someone in. David was weeping openly now. Can you ever forgive me? I considered his question for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't something I can simply grant, David. It has to be earned. And earning it will require you to look honestly at what you've become and decide if that's truly who you want to be. I walked past him toward the courthouse exit. The afternoon sunlight was warm on my face. Behind me, I heard footsteps, David following.
Mom, wait.
Please. I turned. Miranda, the things she did, the embezzlement, the forged documents, the debts she hid from me. I didn't know about any of it. But you knew how she treated me. You witnessed it. You chose to say nothing. He had no response to that. David had begun the long process of rebuilding not just his career, but his character. He visited me every Sunday now. We sat together on that porch, talking about things we should have discussed years ago. He told me about his struggles, his regrets, his determination to become better. I told him about my years as a judge, the cases that haunted me, the decisions I was proud of, the wisdom I had accumulated through decades of witnessing human nature at its best and worst. The granddaughters came too. Sophie and Emma, now 10 and 12 years old. We were learning to know each other, slowly, carefully, building the relationship that should have existed all along. I taught them to bake bread the way my mother had taught me. I read them stories from the leather-bound book I had once brought to a birthday party where I wasn't welcome. I showed them my portrait in the courthouse hallway, and their eyes grew wide with wonder. Grandma, you were really a judge? You really decided important cases? Yes, sweetheart. For 30 years. That's so cool. Why didn't we know? I smiled at them. A genuine smile, full of warmth. Because I forgot to tell you. But I won't forget anymore. There are moments now when I sit in my garden and remember everything that happened. The humiliation outside the courthouse. The shock on Miranda's face when she saw me at the bench. The tears in David's eyes when he finally understood. And I realized that what felt like the worst moment of my life, being shoved against a wall and called worthless, was actually the beginning of something extraordinary. It was the moment I stopped hiding. The moment I reclaimed myself. The moment I proved that age doesn't diminish dignity, that silence isn't the same as peace, and that a mother's love, even when it has been wounded, can find its way back to hope. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I am 72 years old now, and I have finally learned the most important lesson of my life. Your worth is never determined by how others treat you. It is determined by how you treat yourself. And sometimes the greatest act of love you can offer, to yourself and to those who have hurt you, is simply to stand up, speak your truth, and let the world see exactly who you are.